Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Throughout this story, I would like for all of you to please keep in mind that I was 20 years old and very naive. You're going to think I'm stupid, and I was. Probably lucky to be alive, and God do I know that. I kick myself whenever I think about this day, but I just wanted to get some other opinions. Maybe I'm wrong about him. Okay, so about 20 years ago, I was walking down the road in a not-so-great area. It was summertime, and I was dressed appropriately for the heat, shorts and a tank. I'm very thin, and I was downright skinny then, and got mistaken for a sex worker more times than I care to admit. This may or may not be important to the story. So anyways, I was walking to pick up my son from daycare. As I was going about my way, a truck full of men started to catcall and follow me. They turned around several times to yell at me out of the window, and I was getting nervous about it. I was passing a gas station parking lot, and a man not much older than myself stopped in a nice car and asked if I would like a ride. He didn't seem scary and he was attractive, so I said okay, and I got in his car. I wish I could smack myself. So I get into the car with him, and he asks me where I'm going. I tell him that it's about a mile straight down the road that I'm on. He starts out going the wrong way and just tells me that he needs to turn around. I pay little mind. He starts to ask me about myself, so I tell him I was escaping a DV situation and I was staying in a women's shelter nearby. I was telling him how close my activities were monitored and that I was due to pick up my son any minute. And I think that saying this may actually be what saved me. At some point I notice that he takes another wrong turn, but I don't know the area at all, so when I point it out, he says that he's taking a shortcut or something, and I just go back to talking like an idiot. But then, I get a whiff of something. I know now that that smell was death, decomposition. I know this for sure now, but I did not then. I turn around and I look in the back seat looking for spoiled food or something. The car is absolutely spotless. I bring up the smell, and he brushes it off and changes the subject. But for some reason, the smell just started getting stronger. My dumb ass brings it up again, and I say, "What is that smell?" He says that he doesn't know, probably something he forgot to take out and has gone bad. When I tell you guys that there was not a crumb in that vehicle, I'm baffled. But eventually, he drops me off safe to my destination. He doesn't tell me his name, ask for my number or give me his, and I don't think much of it until much later when I smell that smell again. But this time, I know what it is and it triggers the memory of the guy in the car. This was probably 2005 in Covington, and I'm very sure that him being aware that not only would I be missed, I would be missed quickly, and my movements would be tracked very specifically, was the only reason that I made it back out of that car that day. When I was in middle school, I remember taking a sex ed class. This must have been 5th grade because we all had to watch the infamous video where we learn about our bodies and our reproductive organs and had to watch a video of a woman giving birth. I remember asking a female friend of mine an inappropriate question regarding the video that we had just watched while we were walking in the hallways without realizing that the vice principal was in earshot. He called me into his office to scold me until I explained that it was a question revolving around what we had seen in class. He calmed down and then ended up chatting casually with me. Well, a little too casually. Maybe in an attempt to seem cool and relatable, he explained that he had a tattoo. I asked him what it was and he showed me. It was a tattoo of an artistic-looking fish on his shoulder. Even back then, I thought the tattoo was corny as fuck, but it was fitting considering this guy was kind of dweeby. He then went on to tell me that the artist who tattooed him in New Hampshire went on to murder or dismember 2 women a year later and was then sentenced to life in prison. I have no clue why he thought it would be appropriate to share this story with a middle schooler, but I was absolutely shook by the story for the following week, and I never forgot it. This happened to me roughly 1.5 years ago, and I still get anxious thinking about what happened in the summer of 2023. It was the year that I had my first success with my online business, which allowed me to start traveling Europe while working and saving up for my dream of buying farmland. 2023 started amazingly. I lived a few months in Malta, then in Budapest, visiting friends who study abroad. I am originally from Germany. I'm 32, turning 33 this year. The first few destinations were a wonderful contrast to the miserable cold winters that dragged on for months in Germany. And after having a tremendous time in Malta and Budapest, it was already the beginning of summer. My final destination that summer was to visit a friend, let's call him Ben. He was about a year younger than me and currently studying medicine in Varna, located in the very east of Bulgaria. It's an interesting place with lots of Soviet-style, slightly run-down architecture, but it still has its charm as a beach city. The people are very nice, and there are some beautiful spots. There are many expats, and I spent my days enjoying the large parks near the beach itself, and its various cafes and clubs. I met lots of people and frequently went out to beach clubs with them on weekends. It was a nice hot summer, and I was enjoying myself until one particular night. I was out with Ben and many of his university friends again. We partied all night, had drinks, danced for hours, and just enjoyed ourselves during this wonderful summer night. Since we'd been to day events before the party, I started feeling tired and I decided to head home. I should describe the layout of the city as it's unique. Varna has a beach alongside its entire length, and for most parts, there are very big parks stretching 4 kilometers along the beach before they lead to the city. My rented apartment was slightly northwest of the clubs, roughly a 10 to 15 minute walk, which I had done many times. People had warned me about occasional attacks, muggings, and robberies, always asking me to walk at least part of the way with someone. I usually didn't listen, just walked with my music playing, though I remained wary of my surroundings. That night, a few people who were also tired left with me. They lived a bit more west, so I had to leave them after 5 minutes, and I continued alone with my music. It must have been around 4 a.m. when I came to a park that I usually cross. It was separate from the main beach parks and closer to where I was living. Being summer and a weekend, there were still a few people walking around and driving even at 4 a.m. When I entered the park, I wasn't shocked to see someone sitting on a bench maybe 50 meters ahead of me to the right. He was just sitting there, staring at his phone. And I remember the scene vividly. Behind him or some bushes and trees. But as the lighting in the park was very sparse, I only noticed at the last moment that someone was approaching him from behind through the bushes. I think because I walked into the park, the guy sitting on the bench must have briefly looked up from his phone and heard someone approaching. It all happened so fast. I saw someone running out of the bushes with both hands raised over their head, holding a large rock, sprinting at the guy still sitting there as he turned his head. Not immediately realizing the danger, I kept walking briefly before stopping. The guy on the bench screamed and then ran straight out of the park, vaulting over another row of bushes and disappearing across the street. I pulled off my headphones and I stood there watching, not fully comprehending what was happening. You need to understand that this all happened so fast. Until the guy who had just tried to attack the other person with a rock turned to face me. A shiver ran down my spine as adrenaline rushed through me, preparing to run. When he lifted that rock again and started manically smiling while running in my direction, I turned and I ran for my life. He followed me for roughly 2 minutes, and I could still see him behind me even after crossing the street. I ran around the block and I was incredibly relieved to find a kebab shop still open. I rushed through the door, and the people inside were shocked. I couldn't speak straight, but I didn't need to say much as the psychopath came to the store and then started bashing the big window with a rock. And when the glass broke, he finally ran away. What makes this even more chilling is that I later discovered that I probably encountered someone who wasn't new to violence. In the same city, same park, someone had been bludgeoned and then killed with multiple stabs in the back just 1 year earlier. I waited a few minutes, put my music back in, and I walked home, carefully avoiding the park. Afterwards, I was shaking at home, locking every door, and I couldn't sleep well. And the next morning, I discovered that I had fractured a tooth from grinding it in my sleep that night. I am forever grateful that this turned out okay. I'm also grateful that I met those people who offered to smoke earlier, as the timing might have saved both me and the guy on the bench. If I hadn't entered that park at that exact moment, the man on the bench might not have noticed his attacker in time. Well, this was the scariest situation of my life, other than nearly drowning in the ocean once. I think I learned that there are some situations that you cannot control. Stay safe out there, folks. And maybe don't walk in the park alone at 4 a.m. in a foreign city. Every year, my family would have a big 4th of July party. My grandparents would come over, my aunts, uncles, cousins, and even some close friends and neighbors. All the kids would line up their fireworks, and we'd decide in what order we wanted to shoot everything. The adults always prepared the food and would sit around and talk. It was always a blast. We rarely had issues as in fights, injuries, and the such, and I think a lot of that had to do with my grandfather. If anyone tried to start an argument, he always knew what to say to get people to calm down and ease the tension. He was a smart man, and I definitely learned a lot from him over the years. As I got older and started going to parties or hosting my own, I always held on to some of his wisdom and advice to make me a better person. One of the things he taught me was to be aware of your surroundings. He was in the Air Force, and he always talked about how important it is to know what's happening around you, and while you shouldn't dwell on the negative, you should also be able to get an idea as to possible outcomes around you and know how to react to them appropriately. This has helped me tremendously in my career of becoming an aircraft mechanic, as you have to be precise in everything that you do. Another thing he taught me was no matter where you live or your age, it's always polite to get to know your neighbors. Again, you never know if you could be the person they need in their life to be a friend or someone they can turn to when they feel they may be in trouble or need of help. So, when my parents moved and I was still young, we made little baskets for everyone on our block as our way of introducing ourselves. And these were two things he taught me that are important to this story today. I was thankful that my wife was able to meet my grandfather before his passing, so she knew all about him and his wisdom. So when we got our first place together, she knew that we would have to introduce ourselves to the block. We moved in early June and decided that we wanted to have a housewarming party and a 4th of July party all in one. Because of this, we agreed that we would let the neighborhood know, as well as a warning in case we got too loud or if they wanted to join and get to know each other better. We prepared our gifts that week, and over that weekend, we went off to start handing them out. Everything went as I would expect. Some people were happy to meet us, some were surprised people, but still introduced themselves, and some even wanted to show my wife her jewelry collection. There were 2 houses though that we did not get an answer at, so we left our gift with a card at the door, so they still get the introduction and invite. One of our neighbors, Kathy, seemed to be the cliché neighbor that knows everything about everyone, so we got the short version of everyone's history from her. I appreciate this, since I wasn't able to meet everyone and I had mentioned this to her. She explained that one house was someone's winter house and that they wouldn't be back for a few months, and the other one, she said to give up on trying to meet them. Curious, I asked her about this. She said that it was a middle-aged couple living there. They rarely went outside. She thinks the guy worked overnights, as she always saw him coming home late at night and not leaving till the evening, while the woman always left midday looking her best and coming home before he left for the night. She tried talking to them on a few occasions, and the guy tended to ignore her, while the woman seemed to rush the conversation and did not want to get too close. She said that she gave up trying to get to know them, but she had her door camera, so she always saw them coming and going since they live across from her. I just kept this in the back of my mind to process it later. We then said our goodbyes, finished by going back to the winter house to pick up the gift that we had left, and agreed to try again in the winter, being assured by Kathy that she would let us know when they got back. The following morning, as we left to get coffee, I noticed that the gift from the mysterious couple's home was gone, so hopefully they got it and at least enjoyed it. The next couple of weeks went by as normal. We unpacked and prepared ourselves for our party. This whole time, never seeing this couple. Kathy was certainly right. It was going to make for a difficult time if we ever wanted to try meeting them. Then came the night of the party. Both of our parents showed up, a few of our siblings, because some couldn't make it, as well as some of our old friends and new neighbors. Kathy came over and brought us a cake, I believe, but said since her dog was afraid of fireworks, that she would just watch ours from her home, so he wasn't alone. A few people had kids with them, so we kept it appropriate for the time being. After the kids finished off their fireworks, and those families left as well as our parents, we started getting a little more rowdy. There was more drinking now, a little more stupidity with the fireworks, but everyone was having a good time. At one point, I was fetching more rounds for everyone, asking who all wanted one, when I noticed a guy that was talking to my wife's friend over towards the side of the patio that I didn't recognize at first. He was wearing dark jeans that appeared to be really muddy, a button-down shirt that was halfway open, and a baseball cap. Thinking it was someone her friend brought along, I asked if they wanted anything and made my way to the kitchen to grab the drinks. I gave her friend and the guy their drinks, and they both said thanks, and I carried on passing out the other drinks. As the night went on, I saw the same guy talking to other people, including my wife. He was still carrying around the same bottle that I got him, and when I would ask if he wanted another or if I could take it from him, he always refused, saying that he was still drinking it. I kept an eye on him just because I didn't recognize him and no one had introduced him to me yet. We still enjoyed our night, taking pictures, recording our stupid antics, until it was time for people to start dispersing. When my wife was seeing her friend off, I noticed the guy wasn't with her, so I went and asked her about him. She said that she had come alone, but the guy was talking to her for quite a bit. She said that she didn't recognize him either, and thought that it was one of my friends from work since I was talking to him quite a bit. I just let it go, thinking maybe he was someone from work that I didn't know too well, or maybe he came with someone else and I just didn't notice. I did drink a lot that night, so I was also not fully there, I'm sure. We cleaned up a bit and then headed to bed. Thankfully, we were off the next day so we could recover. But still, I was never able to determine who our mystery guest was. As I was coming home from work sometime that same week, I saw several cop cars at the non-social neighbor's house. Like anyone would, I tried looking to see if I could tell what was going on, but I couldn't see much more than crime scene tape going across the house. I got home to be greeted with my wife and Kathy in the living room. They told me that they didn't know what was going on yet, but Kathy was already visiting when the police started showing up. And shortly after I got home, Kathy mentioned going back home so she could try to find out more. When we actually had someone else knocking on our door. It was another officer wanting to ask us questions about our neighbor and if we had seen him. I explained that I didn't even know what they looked like, but Kathy began describing them more and said that she hadn't seen them in a few days. The officer pulled out a picture to show us and asked if we had seen him, when my wife and I realized that he was the guy at our party. Kathy and the officer both looked shocked, and the officer began asking us what he was wearing, how long he was there, wanted to know when he got there and when he left, if he had said anything to us or was acting suspicious at all. We tried to answer the best that we could about his whereabouts and explain he was technically invited, but since we never actually met them, we didn't know if they would show up or not. Kathy finally started asking the questions that we were all wondering to find out what was going on, when the officer tried being vague but still informed us. He said that they were called there on a welfare check by someone, and upon arrival, they had reason to enter the property, where they found a female's body in a tub, and the man that lived there was nowhere to be found. Kathy's description confirmed that it was the woman that lived there, and we were all in shock. They said that they were looking for him for questioning and asked us to call if we ever saw him, but to avoid letting him in as he might be dangerous. So, we were obviously a bit on edge at this point, not knowing what to do. We offered to let Kathy and her dog stay in our spare room so she wasn't alone, but was insistent that she would be okay alone. We walked her back home, and when we returned, we made sure that all the windows and doors were locked to make sure that there was no chance of someone getting in. thankfully, we also had security cameras that we could watch as well. That day came and went without them finding the guy. News fans started showing up, and we were seeing it on TV now. That's when it started getting worse. They said that he was wanted for the murder of his girlfriend, who most likely died on the 4th. That's when I started thinking, this guy was definitely at my place on the 4th. He wasn't talking about himself much, but made sure to talk to a few people to make it obvious that he was there. I began feeling like we were being used as an alibi, and I felt sick. This girl was either dead or dying in a house a few down from ours, while we were there covering for him, a murderer. Our families were there. It's just a terrifying thought. And while it was bittersweet as a woman lost her life, they did finally catch the guy. He was trying to flee the country, but only got as far as Texas when they finally caught him. Now, this was coming from Kathy. She said her husband was a cop, so she knew some of the detectives. They told her that the woman's sister hadn't heard from her, and the guy had a record, and so she was worried that something had happened. She was most likely killed the night of the 4th, so that confirmed my suspicion that we were definitely used. I'm glad they caught the guy, but since this incident, I monitor a hell of a lot better as to who comes over to my place or just who I'm around with in general. My grandfather was definitely right. You really can't be too careful. I have a strange story that occurred back when I was in middle school that I genuinely cannot explain. Back then, I didn't have many friends, but the friends that I did have were pretty close. We were a bit of a clique, but when you don't have many people to talk to or do things with, that sort of thing does happen. My group of friends included 3 other guys. We'll just call them J, T, and P. And the 4 of us were super close all throughout elementary school, and we were more like a small band of brothers than just casual friends. This continued up to middle school as well. We had several classes together, so it worked out pretty well. The 2nd quarter of the 2nd year of middle school, which would have made it 8th grade, I think, we ended up adding a 5th person to our little group of friends, a boy named Mark. I'm using Mark's name because he's probably the most important person in the story, as the event is about him specifically, and for other reasons that may make sense later. Mark had apparently gone to the same elementary school as us, though he wasn't in the same class as the 4 of us, and we had never met him. I remember when I asked him about it, he had mentioned that he was in my class in 4th and 6th grade, but I couldn't remember him being in the classroom. He knew the teachers' names, and he knew other kids in the rooms, which told me that he wasn't lying at all. I felt bad, but I just couldn't recall him being there. Now, the reason that we had added Mark to our friend group is kind of strange. He just kind of showed up one day during the morning and at lunch, like he'd always been there. He acted like he had always been part of our group. He was talking to us, laughing about things that only we would have found funny. It was seriously as if he was one of us from day one. But he just kind of showed up and sat with us one day. I know, that may not sound too weird to some people. Maybe he was just really charismatic. But it was weird. And it got weirder. Not because he was there, but because of what happened after that 2nd quarter. In between the 2nd and 3rd quarter is winter break, which is basically that week and a half or so where we didn't have classes. During this time, I had to spend the entire week at my grandparents' house at my parents' request, so I didn't get to spend any time with my group of friends. I was really bummed out about it, and J, T, and P promised me that they wouldn't do anything too stupid without me, as I was always the one getting into trouble. I spent my time there, and then when it came to go back to school, I noticed that Mark wasn't there on the first day back. I didn't think much of it. People get sick when they have all their holiday get-togethers. Maybe he was just sick and going to be back the next day. Now, mind you, at this point, I didn't mind Mark, but I didn't really feel like he was one of the boys, if that makes sense. I had an issue with him just kind of showing up and thinking that we had to accept him as one of us, but I didn't dislike him. He was an okay kid, and he was a pretty funny guy as well. Then the next day, I noticed that there was still no Mark, and I ended up asking Jay if he had heard from him, and he asked me who I was talking about. T and P both said the same thing. They didn't know anyone named Mark. I thought they were messing with me at first, just trying to pull one over on me. And then when Mark came back, they would pretend like I was crazy and that they never said anything about not knowing him. That was until I asked our math teacher, the only class that I had with Mark, if Mark was just out sick or if he was okay. She had no idea who I was talking about. I described Mark, said his last name to her, told her that he was a funny kid with the short dark hair and glasses that usually sat next to me. And she seriously looked at me like I was insane. She said that the person that sat next to me was a girl in class named Deborah, and that she would be back in class the next day. But there was never anyone named Mark that sat next to me, and no one by that name in the class at all. This set me on a really weird and confused path. I actually went back to try and find Mark in any of the elementary school yearbooks. I checked my 7th grade yearbook as well, and I couldn't find him at all. I checked my 4th and my 6th grade books, and there was never anyone named Mark, last name starting with a G, in either of those classes or the other classes for those years. In fact, there were no Marks nor any students with last names starting with G's in either year. It was like he was just wiped from the face of the earth entirely, and I was the only one to remember him. It was really strange that this kid that showed up one day like he knew who we all were and had always been our friend, disappeared as quickly as he integrated into our group. I really didn't know what to make of this, and I still don't. Like I said, I didn't mind the guy. He wasn't my best friend or anything, but to get to know someone over a couple of months, spend mornings and lunch with him, and have math class with him, only to have him simply disappear without a trace, it made me feel like I was crazy. I know that this wasn't a hallucination, as my other friends interacted with him, and it was seriously a couple of months. There's no way that I hallucinated a friend for that long. But in the end, I just had to accept that this person didn't exist and then move on. Something that I hated doing, but it didn't matter how much I talked about him because no one else knew who he was. I do hope that nothing bad happened to him, and I hope that if he was from another timeline or something, that he and I stayed friends. Unfortunately, in this reality, he just simply never existed. I have a story that honestly sounds like a bit of an urban legend, but it actually happened to me back whenever I had moved to the small town that I used to live in back in spring of 2003. I don't want to give out my exact location, but I will say that I lived in a small town in the southern part of the Midwest, in a town that was definitely more rural than urban. It was a nice little community, and I chose to move there because the company that I worked for was expanding into the neighboring city, which was only about a 20-minute drive away. I wanted to be close to my new home office, but I kind of wanted to avoid actually living in the city itself. So, I compromised and I moved into the small town on the outskirts. Like I mentioned, it was nice, and for the most part, it was just the people who lived there, a general store, the church, and a few other small businesses. As is the case with most small towns, there were a few warnings to those that were new, specifically to avoid certain places outside of the town to the west, which is where the whole urban legend thing comes into play. Nothing screams campfire story like being told to avoid two places: the old mines and the forest that had grown over it. I actually asked someone why I should avoid the forest and if it was because the land was unstable from the mine. And they told me that, well, there were things that were far worse in the woods than unstable ground. Again, I know this literally sounds like a horror movie because that's what I was thinking the entire time. I had just moved there and I was being warned about things in the woods and people were being ominous about everything involved. This was literally the plot to a scary movie that I swear I saw back in the early 90s. And much like those movies, I was going to go ahead and just treat these warnings as noise. I wasn't much of a rebel. I just wasn't going to let some nonsense pull me away from the walking trails in the unincorporated parts of the hiking areas. When I moved to the town, I told myself that on the weekends, I was going to make more time to become in tune with nature, and that I was going to take my dog, Maddie, hiking out in the woods so that she could get used to it as well. About a month into living there, I finally decided that it was time to put my plan into action. It was a bright, beautiful springtime Saturday. It was warm, the sun was out early, and the air was just perfect. When I got up, I knew right then and there that this would be the day that I took Maddie out onto the trails for a nice hike, and that it would be the start of a new hobby for us. So I got dressed for it. I got Maddie all sorted out, got a backpack full of water and food just in case, as well as whatever essentials I thought that we would need, and I was beyond ready to go. We drove out to the walking path and parked in the lot near the park. I took a while to study the map that was posted, and I looked at how the trails curved. I made a note of how things were situated in my head, in case I got lost and had to use a compass to get back. Being 2003, I didn't have a smartphone or a GPS to get me back anywhere. After a good amount of debating how I wanted to take it, I went ahead with a plan, and I started out into the woods. Now, my plan had me going on the walking trail that would circle back from the west, around the south, and then reconnect at the east. However, at the furthest south of the trail, you could keep going and you could hit that spot of land that people warned me about. I, of course, was going to check this area out. If for no other reason, I was going to just prove that it was all a bunch of bull. So there we went. Maddie and I got out onto the trails, walked around, and after a while I decided that I was at the right spot and started to head off the trail toward where the area was that I was told not to go. At first, it wasn't that bad. It was just a thicker area of trees with no real distinct marks. But after a while, it did start to get a bit strange. As I pressed on, I noticed that there were spots where the tree seemed to just be dead. I mean, completely lifeless, which isn't necessarily too out there, but it was weird to see some random trees that were just completely void of leaves in the middle of this lush forest. And as I moved south, the dead trees started to become more abundant until I hit a circle of them that was completely brown and decrepit. At this point, Maddie started whimpering and pushing against my leg, as if she was trying to let me know that something was wrong. At this point, my courage turned to genuine curiosity. Something was really strange here, and I kind of wanted to go a bit deeper and see what I could see. I pressed into the dead zone until I got to an area where it was more open. The circle of dead trees wasn't huge. It was just dense and obvious, and in the middle there was a clearing that was decent sized that seemed to have been cut out. As I entered into the clearing, the air grew noticeably colder, and it hit a level of silence that was painful. I could hear my heartbeat, my breathing, and the soft whimpering that Maddie was holding back. I stood there in the clearing, looking around and trying to piece together what exactly it was, when I started noticing that the air felt, I guess, stale is the word that I want to use. It was motionless and it had a smell to it that was just empty. I tried to walk into the center of the opening, but Maddie was refusing to move, which was incredibly unlike her. She was an adventurous dog and usually didn't disobey me if I tried to pull her in a direction. And to see her like this made me hit that point where I was second-guessing my actions. If she was this scared, then something was going on. I decided that it was time to go ahead and go back, that I'd spent enough time investigating this mystery. And as I turned to walk back to the way I came, the silence was broken by what sounded like a stringed instrument, like a violin. I know that sounds really weird, but as I was walking away, I started to hear something that sounded like someone playing a single, out of tune, and constant note on a violin. That was my breaking point. My slow pace doubled, and I pulled on Maddie's leash and I told her to come. We started with a fast walk, but moved into a jog to get back to the trail, which we did, thankfully. When we got back to the trail, everything seemed to be back to normal. It was warmer, the air was moving, and life had returned to the forest. I stopped to catch my breath, take a big drink of water, and tell myself that I would literally never go back that way again. And after a few moments, I got back to my walk. We still had half the trail to go before we could get to the car, but I felt fine, a little freaked out over what we saw as if it was definitely unnatural. But Maddie, on the other hand, was kind of freaking me out. Every few minutes or so, she would pause and then look back into the direction of where we were, and she would let out a whimper and try to pull me to keep going. She did this for the rest of the walk back to the car, like she was waiting for something to follow us, or like she thought something was there in the distance. Thankfully, she stopped doing this after we got home, and she hasn't had that level of paranoia since then. We also haven't gone back on the trail since that day, because I didn't want to get too close to it at all. The whole feeling was unnerving and terrifying, but I think I was actually feeling a bit more scared with how Maddie was acting on the rest of the hike. I feel like she felt something was following us, like she knew that it was there and she was keeping a close eye on it the rest of that hike. Part of me wonders if something tried to follow me out there, but just didn't for some reason. I don't know. Obviously, I wasn't the only one to have dealt with this, considering people had warned me, which just makes me more curious as to what exactly it was. Some kind of break between our world and the supernatural? Some kind of demonic ground? I have no idea. I no longer live in that town, and unfortunately, Maddie did pass away a couple of years ago. But the memories of that hike, the feelings that I got when I found that clearing, the way she reacted, the sound that I heard, and just everything about it. Those memories have never left me, and they probably never will. I have a really weird story from way back when I was a very young lad. I think at that time I would have been around 12 or 13 at the very oldest. Back then, I lived in my parents' old house, which was pretty much in the middle of nowhere in the northern Midwest. I don't want to give the exact location because I really don't know what this whole thing was about and if it was more serious than I think. I don't want to, I guess, anger someone or something. I know that sounds stupid, but to me it makes sense, especially with what I saw and how it ended up. Back then, I used to spend a lot of time hiking out in the woods behind my neighborhood. There weren't any other kids in my area, and my only sibling was my older sister. So my childhood was honestly pretty boring and void of friendship. I made the best of it though, and I used to make up a lot of fun games with myself. Not that I remember what I used to do. I just used to play some dumb games until I had to go home for dinner. This event actually took place in those woods. It was sometime in the middle of summer because I was out of school and I was home alone for most of the day because my sister was always over at her girlfriend's house. So I just pretty much did whatever I wanted to do. On this day, I was doing as I always did, and I went out into the woods to see what I could get up to. I was out playing, doing a whole lot of nothing, when I noticed something out a bit into the forest. It looked like a person, like it was a person standing in the woods, and they were of an adult's height and stature, but they were just standing there, completely and totally still. I was a bit nervous at first. I hadn't seen anyone in these woods in the years that I have lived there, and most of the people didn't spend any time back there. It was really strange to see this person standing in the woods, and even weirder that they were wearing all black from top to bottom. It looked like they were wearing a ski mask too, since the back of their head was covered in some kind of black cloth as well. Again, this was the middle of summer. It was kinda hot outside, so the fact that they were wearing all black and what appeared to be a ski mask was even weirder. I started kind of creeping around to see what exactly this person was looking at because, like I mentioned, he was just standing there completely stone still. At first, I was kind of sneaking around, but again, he wasn't paying any attention to me. So after a bit, I stopped sneaking and I just kind of started walking around him from a safe distance. Honestly, I wasn't 100% sure that he was actually a person and not a mannequin that was placed there, because he didn't react to me walking around into what would have been his line of sight. As I got around to the front, I noticed two things that made this whole thing even weirder. First off, he wasn't staring at anything. There was nothing in front of him. He was just standing there and looking down at the ground. Secondly, he was wearing a plain white mask with no details. It was a mask that was shaped like a face, but it was just plain white with no other details. So, to reiterate that, this person was standing completely still, wearing all black, including some kind of head cover, and was wearing a white mask with no detail, and he was staring at literally nothing. After just standing there for a few moments, I decided that this was actually terrifying and I took off to go back home. Again, I kept my distance, but he continued to not pay any attention nor acknowledge that I was anywhere nearby. There was a point where I did get close enough to see that this man was breathing and that this was a person and not a mannequin. I just went home and I wasn't really sure what I should do or if I should really do anything because he wasn't hurting anyone or doing anything illegal or anything like that. I told my mom when she got home that there was a man in the woods, and she told me that it was public and that there wasn't anything wrong with that. I kind of just accepted that response and then moved on. But it doesn't quite end there though. There is actually a little more to the story. A couple of days after that happened, I had actually gone back out into the woods because I wanted to see if the man was still there. No idea why I thought he would still be there, or again, as it was a few days later. I guess I just thought if he was there, then whatever he was doing would be considered sketchy, and I could possibly get my parents out there to see what was happening. Of course, he wasn't there. But when I went out to where he was standing, I did find something that I didn't expect. Right where the man was standing was a small wooden cross stabbed into the ground, and the white mask was nailed to where the two parts of the wood crossed over. There was nothing written on the cross. There was nothing else there, just the cross with the mask. But then it was just weird to me, and I had no idea what to think. But now part of me thinks that it had something to do with a cult or something like that, because it was just odd behavior, and the whole cross thing was just bizarre. That's actually why I didn't want to mention the location, because if it was a cult thing, I don't want them coming to find me, because I still live in the town. And before anyone asks, no, I never went back to that area of the woods. And no, I never told anyone else about the cross. And no, I have no idea if it's still there. So, to me, this was the scariest thing that I have ever experienced. And I hope that I never experience anything like it again. About 15 years ago, I had something happen to me that has haunted me since the day it happened, and I genuinely do not have an explanation for what exactly it was or how things went the way they did. This is the only time anything like this has ever happened to me, and for that, I am thankful. Mostly because the outcome was not a positive one, and with how everything compounded within a short period of time, I was honestly ready to give up. Obviously, I'm glad that I didn't, but I was ready to. Let me explain how it all went on that day. As I said, it was a decade and a half ago, so it would have been back in 2007. Back then, on Sundays, I used to get together with a few of my girlfriends so that we could get brunch at a local hangout spot that we really liked. It was decently priced and in a good part of the downtown area, and they had a really good food for their brunch menu. When we went during the warmer months, we would always take one of the seats that was on the front patio, as it was always incredibly comfortable sitting outside and having our meal. It had become pretty much the main thing that I would look forward to every week, as the girls that I spent time with were my best friends from high school, as we would just talk and gossip about whatever was on our minds. On this particular day, we were there, eating and just talking about our weeks, when I noticed a man that was sitting on the ground in the nearby park. He was just propping himself against one of the brick retaining walls. This is not a judgmental statement, but he did appear to be homeless, and by that, I mean that he looked like he was a bit unkempt. His clothes were really dirty and a bit ragged, and he just had that weathered look. You know the one, like he had been through a lot and was just doing his best to get through it all. Again, there was zero judgment on my part. He just kind of fit the appearance of what I think of when I think of a homeless man. I will also say that my area doesn't have a large homeless population, so he definitely stood out and caught my attention. After noticing him, I went back to the conversation with my friends and we were just kind of chatting. But then, I looked back over at him and I noticed that he was looking straight at me. As soon as we met eyes, he lifted his hand, gave me a slight wave. And at first, I wasn't sure if he was actually waving at me. But when that thought entered my mind, he nodded as if he knew what I was thinking. And he was telling me that he was for certain waving at me. I felt obligated to wave back, and as soon as I did, the man stood up from where he was resting across the street and then started heading toward us. One of my friends asked if I knew him, and I mentioned that I didn't, and they were all kind of asking why he was coming over to us. And again, I said that I didn't know. I just kind of sat there in silence as he approached, like I was in some kind of trance. I didn't know this man. I had never seen him, nor met him, nor spoken to him. But I felt like I needed to hear whatever it is that he was going to tell me. He crossed the road, walked over to where we were sitting, and he actually knelt down right by where I was seated. He reached over, grabbed my hand, and he said, "I'm so sorry for what you're about to go through, but stay strong and don't give up. Everything will be okay." Now, this in of itself was actually terrifying. This man just walks up, kneels down, and gives me this cryptic and almost threatening message. But it was even more so when he just stood up without elaborating and then walked away. He didn't go back to the park. He didn't stick around the restaurant. He just walked down the sidewalk until we couldn't see him anymore. Obviously, my friend said that this was really weird and asked if I was okay, and I told them that I was fine and just kind of agreed that it was weird. They kept talking about the whole thing, but after a while, I asked to change the subject because I was kind of starting to feel uncomfortable about the whole thing. Now, as I said, this was weird and kind of creepy. But what happened next was actually what makes this such a haunting situation. That week, the same week that this man told me that he was sorry for what I was going to go through, was the week that I lost both of my parents. It was 6 days later, on that following Saturday. They were out driving, just going out to do whatever it is that they like to do. And their car was struck by a drunk driver driving way too fast and swerving into the wrong lane. They were hit head-on at too high a speed for anyone involved to live, and they both lost their lives, and the driver of the other vehicle died as well. They were all three killed on impact. To say that dealing with losing both your parents suddenly like this was hard is an understatement. It was devastating. It killed me inside, to be honest. I'm an only child, and I had to deal with all of their affairs and their estate and everything, and I was only 24. I had no idea what I was doing with my life, much less how to handle things after my parents had passed. Dealing with their stuff afterwards wasn't the hard part, to be clear. It was the fact that I had to sit there and try to do paperwork, schedule their funerals, talk to lawyers, and I was in that deep pit that grieving shoves you into. I couldn't really focus on anything, and I was holding back sobbing literally every moment that I was awake, which was all of them because let me tell you, my sleep schedule was non-existent. I just wanted to end it all. Because my parents were my rock. I needed them for guidance in my life, and they were just never going to be there again. On the day of their funeral, my family showed up and everything was so bleak. I felt like I was just empty. I didn't know what I was going to do the next day and the next week, or if it was even worth continuing. And as I was sitting there, mulling over the options, my uncle on my dad's side was up at the podium saying some final words, and he caught my attention when he said, "We have to make sure that we stay strong, that we don't give up, and remember that everything will be okay." When he said this, the thought of that homeless man re-entered my mind. Obviously, I hadn't thought about him with all that was going on, but at that moment, he was all that I could think about. I remembered what he said to me and was again reminded of his words, considering my uncle has said them almost verbatim. I got through the hard parts by just reminding myself that things would be okay eventually, that it was okay to feel pain, that it was okay to have these feelings during this time, so long as I stayed strong and kept going. And for the sake of my parents, I did keep going. I did stay strong, and eventually, things did get less painful. I won't say that it ever hits the point where things are fine. Losing them is still devastating to this day, but I'm able to live my life for me and for them, and I am able to keep a smile on my face and actually mean it most of the time. That all said, that day 15 years ago when that man grabbed my hand and said that he was sorry for what I was about to go through, what was that? Was he clairvoyant and he was able to see it? Was there some sort of otherworldly connection that he and I shared, and he was able to tell what was about to happen? Or was this honestly just a really weird coincidence? In the end, I obviously never saw him again. I tried to find him, but if I ever do, I will thank him for the heads up, and I will thank him for the encouraging message that he gave me. Because as haunting as it's been, it's also because of his words that I realized that I needed to keep going. If he was able to see the bad that was going to happen, then I have to assume that he was also able to see the good. And encouraging me to continue was his way of saying that he knew that things would be okay. Hey everyone, this is your creepy sister. Thank you so much for watching the video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Also, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. It really helps the channel out. A big shout out to both my channel members and Patreon members. Thank you so much for taking your support to the next level. You guys are great. And again, to everyone, stay scared, because your fear feeds me.